Hitler had enough troops and firepower to defeat the Red Army, but not enough to round up prisoners and transport them away from the front.
Although the Germans destroyed in the neighborhood of 6 Soviet armies and encircled many of those forces, they simply did not have the infantry strength to police up to capture those individuals that they encircled.
Many potential prisoners escaped. Those who didn't were kept in outdoor cages, where eventually freezing conditions and lack of food meant almost certain death. But for the Nazis, prisoners were a minor concern. Operation Blue was proceeding as planned, and what was left of Stalin's Red Army was being pushed steadily eastward. By early July, a jubilant Adolf Hitler proclaimed the Russian is finished. Anticipating the pending collapse of the Soviet Union, Hitler modified Operation Blue. First, he ordered the 6th Army to seize Stalin's namesake, the city of Stalingrad. The rest of Army Group B was split off to take the Caucasus, while a major portion of Army Group A was sent north to attack Leningrad. Hitler's confidence was premature. He was proclaiming victory before the battles had been won. He was spreading his forces too thin, pulling much-needed mechanized support away from his infantry.
That meant that the German army was essentially tackling 2 strategic objectives, not only Stalingrad, but also the oil fields of the Caucasus.
The 6th Army was hardest hit. As the men prepared for their assault on Stalingrad, the 4th Panzer, their supporting tank army, headed to the Caucasus. This left the German 6th Army vulnerable as it moved towards the city. The Panzer Mark IIIs were the workhorses of the Nazi army. Designed by Daimler-Benz, the heavily fortified 23-ton tank could reach speeds of up to 21 miles per hour. The German tanks outgunned and outmaneuvered their Soviet counterparts. Stalin was relying on the T-26, slow-moving, lightly armed vehicle. In 1941, the Nazis destroyed more than 20,000 Soviet tanks.
We tend in the West to think of our own technological supremacy, but we often overlook the fact that German panzer design, if you will, the advances that they tried to push, and they did succeed in achieving remarkable advances in their armored fleet, these were designed to combat Soviet numerical advantage, but also Soviet technological advantage.
The 6th Army would be more vulnerable without Panzer's support, but at that time it hardly seemed to matter. In July of 1942, Soviet resistance was crumbling and Hitler's troops were driving towards Stalingrad. The rest of the world was falling as well. Continental Europe was under Nazi control. In Africa, legendary Field Marshal Erwin Rommel had driven British forces back into Egypt and was poised to take Cairo. And Nazi subs were prowling the US coastline, menacing the Allies' latest arrival.
Operation Blau was proceeding so well that Hitler now wanted a new prize, the city of Stalingrad. While not as strategically important as the oil fields of the Caucasus, taking Stalin's namesake city would be a body blow to the Soviet army. Like the misconception of Stalin's retreat, it was once again believed that the road to the city was a simple one. The second misconception is that German advance in late June, July, and August was a relatively easy cakewalk against fairly limited opposition. We now know that this is false.
It turned out to be anything but. As the Nazis rumbled towards Stalingrad, the Soviets were regrouping as best they could. Stalin began deploying newly formed armies into the Don Bend, a section of the Don River that formed a sideways U. It was an ideal spot to make a stand. The fighting was fierce. This was the first major Red Army counteroffensive since the start of Operation Blue. The two sides engaged in Voronezh, a city near the Don.
Stalin committed a brand new tank army, the first the Red Army had ever employed, the 5th Tank Army, into action northwest of Voronezh.
This was a deadly unit, boasting Stalin's latest tank, the T-34. The Soviets finally had a weapon to rival the German Panzer. Production on the T-34 had begun in 1940, but only in 1942 had it begun to dominate the battlefield, just in time to throw fear into the hearts of complacent German soldiers who had become used to success.
The T-34 was the most numerous Soviet tank of World War II. Of all types, they made about 83,000. This was produced in large numbers. It was easy to produce and quick to produce, generally considered the best general-purpose tank of the Second World War. It had sloped armor, it had wide tracks. All of these things made it extremely survivable and fast, maneuverable in virtually any type of terrain. The 12-cylinder diesel engine was quite powerful for the time, and it gave it a cruising speed of well over 30 miles per hour. It was equipped with a 76mm gun and two 7.62mm machine guns.
There was only one thing everybody was afraid of, that was the Russian tank T-34. Even the regular gun did not penetrate the Russian front of the tank, but they had to use the 7.5 cannon, which was originally against the airplanes.
To destroy a T-34 with, say, a 37mm anti-tank gun, it would literally bounce off the front and even the side slope of the tank. So as far as a tank went, it was reliable, it had sufficient firepower, and it offered great protection for its crew.
The Germans' best hope for defeating a T-34 was with a combination of air power and close-quarter combat. Ground troops needed to be within 250 yards to have any chance of stopping it.
They would have to get very close, and they would aim for vision slits, or they would aim for the engine compartment and try to reduce the tank that way. Once it would be immobile, dismounted soldiers could approach from the rear and climb on top of the tank, ideally tossing a grenade into the crew compartment or slinging a grenade even underneath the main gun system, immobilizing it that way.
What had once looked like an easy stroll into Stalingrad had become a titanic struggle. The 6th Army, attempting to clear the Don Bend alone, was surprised by the ferocity of the Soviet defense. Without the 4th Panzer Army to assist them, the Nazis were taking a relentless beating from the Red Army and the T-34s.
When Paulus's 6th Army attempted to move eastward, this operation, in which the Soviets committed not only their 62nd Army, but two brand new tank armies, inflicted heavy losses, perhaps as many as 10,000 men on the German 6th Army, and prevented 6th Army from fulfilling its mission for upwards of 3 weeks.
These losses were far more severe than previously believed. The Soviets' counteroffensive was exacting a heavy toll.
And there was one very bad experience, a young lieutenant who knew everything better and could not be convinced that you have to be very careful even if you don't have contact with the Russians. He took his unit, about 50 people, to the right and to the left of him, 25, and advanced somehow to the Russian line. We didn't know exactly where they were. And the Russians waited until the Germans approached them with 50 feet and killed all of them. So out of 50 people, 2 people survived.
The army that Hitler had famously boasted could storm the heavens was being driven into the ground of southern Russia. The 6th Army was severely depleted by the time it finally arrived on the banks of the Don.
That meant then that when Paulus began his drive on Stalingrad, he did so with forces vastly reduced in strength, and that ultimately would tell on the effectiveness of that drive.